Hello everyone. For today we are going to talk about another type of experimental design, and this time we are going to discuss the within subjects design. So if you remember our last discussion, we talked about between subjects design, and in between subjects design you learned that we compare two groups or more, and the participants in these groups should not be the same, but rather there are different participants for every group. This time, you will learn that it's also possible for us to conduct an experiment by using the same group again and again, and that's why it's called within subjects design. So even though you have different conditions, you still use the same group. That's why group is not synonymous with conditions all the time in experimental psychology. So let's begin. So the characteristic of a within subjects design is that it uses a single group of participants and tests or observes each individual in all the different treatments being compared. So instead of recruiting other participants in order for you to compare one group or one condition to another, what you're doing here is that you're exposing the same group to a lot of different conditions, two conditions, three conditions, so on and so forth, and then you compare their performance in these different conditions. Let's try to know why is there a need for such approach in designing an experiment. Here is an example of a study that utilized a within subjects design. So Stephens and colleague back in 2009 examined the effects of swearing on the experience of pain. So what they did is that in one condition, the participants were told to repeat their favorite swear word over and over for as long as their hands were in the water. You may be asking right now, why is there a need for the participant to put his hand in the water? It's because that's the safest way to induce pain. And this is cold water. And if your hand is immersed on cold water for a long time, that's painful. In the second condition, the participants repeated a neutral word. So, in other words, you were told to put your hands on icy water. Then, at the first condition, you will repeat your favorite curse word or swear word. And then, in the second condition, you will say a neutral word. For example, rabbit. They found out if you swear or if you curse, it's easier for you to tolerate pain. That's why there are people who are cursing when they are in pain. So they were able to prove that it's easier for people to cope when they express their emotions, especially when they say swear words. Let's look at another example. In this example, Schmidt in 1994 investigated what types of words can we recall. And the way that he delivered the sentences differ. Is it funny? Is it humorous? Or non-humorous? Or not funny? And then he asked them to recall as many as possible. So in other words, it's a non-funny word followed by a funny word followed by another non-funny word, so on and so forth. He discovered eventually that people are more likely to remember funny sentences over neutral sentences. Both studies utilize a within subjects design, but what is the difference? Later, you will know more about that, but now let's talk more about the within subjects design. So the key element of a within subjects design is that all the individuals in one sample participate in all the treatment conditions. So you participate more than once. And if you take a look at it, your performance in one condition is being compared to your performance to the previous condition or to the next condition. Other than that, a within subject study is the ultimate and equivalent groups because the group in one treatment condition is absolutely identical to the group in every other condition. That may be a little complex, so let me explain it. Do you remember that back in between subjects design, we need to match the participants or to find a group that's very similar to the group that we have so that there will be little extraneous variables. But come to think of it, instead of matching groups, why don't we recruit the same group or make use of the same group in another condition? Because technically, that is the ultimate way or the best way to match participants. In other words, the best way to match groups is to reuse your participants. You don't have to worry about matching anymore because by using the same participants, you are already matching. So that's one advantage of a within subjects design. So here's the difference between the studies of Schmidt and colleagues and Stephens and colleagues. And in Stephens and colleagues' case, they utilized letter A. They recruited a sample, they exposed them to treatment condition 1, which is the neutral word, and then after that, they rested for a little while, and then they were exposed to condition 2, which is the swear word condition. In letter A, the treatments are not being administered at the same time, but there's a time difference, there's a gap between one treatment condition to another. On the other hand, the methodology used by Schmid made use of letter B because he alternated funny with neutral words. So in other words, all the treatments were administered together. In my personal experience, it's easier to find something that follows letter A than letter B. In this lecture, you will learn about the weaknesses of the within subjects design, but at the same time, you will learn about its advantages. So you will also learn when should you utilize a between groups design and when should you utilize a within subjects design. Now that you have a basic idea about the characteristics of a within subjects design, it's time to talk about the threats to internal validity. And in order for us to talk about this in detail, first let me remind you of the meaning of internal validity. So if there's internal validity in research, this is the extent to which a research study produces a single unambiguous explanation for the relationship between two variables. Or if I'm going to state it in my own words, you achieve what we call internal validity if you were able to establish cause and effect, and this relationship is not due to external factors or to extraneous variables. Another way to say it is that you are sure that the changes in the dV is caused by the changes in the IV. Now let's look at the possible threats in establishing cause and effect relationships when it comes to within subjects design. So let's begin. First, we have what we call confounding from environmental variables. When we say environmental variables, these are characteristics of the environment that may change from one treatment condition to another. So even though you use the same participant more than once, make sure that the environment where you conducted your research are very similar, if not the same. So you cannot use a bigger room in the next condition, especially if the one you use in the previous condition is a small room. You cannot expose them to a warm room if previously the room was cold, especially if your experiment is not about temperature. You cannot make use of a dark room if your experiment is supposed to be conducted in a well lit room. So these are environmental variables. So even though you are using the same set of participants, these environmental variables become extraneous factors that hinder internal validity or make it challenging to establish cause and effect. Other than that, there can be time-related confounding variables. So this is a serious concern in within subjects design that comes from the fact that design often requires a series of measurements made over time. So an example, if I'm going to tell you that for the second condition, I need you to return by the afternoon, then the problem is that maybe you are more tired in the afternoon. Hence, your performance later today will not be the same with your performance now. So the change in your performance is not due to the manipulation, but it's due to time-related elements. What if I tell you that I want you to come back after 1 month for the second part of the experiment, but a lot can happen in 1 month, and the changes that we observe may not come from the experiment, but rather it may come from time-related elements. What are these time-related elements? First, we have what we call history, or the events that occur in the participants' personal lives. What if one of your participants get married? What if one of them had a problem? What if one of them graduated from college? Then these are significant events in one's life, and these are things that are beyond our control. They will change the well-being of your participant, and that will influence the way your participant answer, the way your participant performs during the study. So that's for history. We also have maturation. So the longer that you make them participate in your experiment, there's a possibility for them to mature as well. There may be physiological or psychological changes that occur in participants during the study and influences the participants' scores. For example, our research is about test-taking skills. So I would like to expose you to different brain-enhancing vitamins, and I would like to take the test afterwards. However, the more tests that you take, the better you are at test taking. What if in the last condition, you are now very good in taking tests? I might conclude that because of the last vitamin I have given you, you had an improvement in test taking strategies. However, the improvement is not due to the brain enhancing vitamin, but rather it's because there's what we call maturation, or there were psychological changes in the span of his participation. We also have what we call instrumentation, or changes in a measuring instrument that occur over time. An example, in the first day of an experiment, I observed your aggressive behavior. I saw you kick another kid in the room. Then I'm going to rate that behavior as very aggressive. However, since I am in that observation room for every day of my life, I see a kid kick someone else every day. Then, after 1 month, the same behavior may not be rated in the same way. After 1 month, what I initially considered as extreme may now be considered average. I may have experienced some changes in the way that I rate behaviors. And those are the changes in instrumentation. We also have what we call regression towards the mean or the average, which means that for every extreme score, there's a tendency to move towards the mean. An example, because you're so intelligent, you got a high score in my experiment. However, you cannot perform excellently all the time. The more tests that you take, there's a possibility that your score will go closer to the average. That's what we call regression towards the mean. Sometimes high scorers become average, or sometimes low scorers become average as well. That's another phenomenon that happens in within subjects design. We also have what we call order effects, or the way that we order our manipulation. Remember my example before about the books? Let's reuse that example. Read book 1 and then take test 1. After 1 week, read book 2, then take test 2. Then you found out that participants scored better after taking test 2. However, it may not be due to the book that they use, but rather perhaps it's because that person can still remember what he learned back in book 1. Hence, there were some carryover effects. The high scores cannot be attributed to the type of book that was used, but rather because the way that the manipulations are ordered, they are now carrying over to other manipulations. So the more book that you read, the more intelligent that you become. That's why sometimes we also have to change the order of our manipulations so that the changes in scores will not be explained by order effects. And what are the examples of order effects? Number one, we have what we call fatigue, or the more books that you read, perhaps you will decline in your performance because you will be tired. Or we also have what we call practice. The more tests that you take, the better you are in test taking. So these are two concepts related to order effects. We also have what we call carryover effects, which is actually related to practice effect. So there may be some sort of rehearsal. The more that you take the same manipulation, the better you are in understanding the goal of the experiment. That's why your performance turned out to be better. Taking one test after another will make you a better test taker. Here's an example of the effects of order effect. On the left side, these are scores with no order effects. Ideally, there should be no carryover effects to the other condition. But if you look at the second condition in group B, look at this. In treatment 2, all of them got a +5 in their scores. Why? It's because in treatment 2, they can still remember what they learned from treatment 1. That's why their experience in treatment 1 is carrying over to treatment 2. In other words, even though right now what we are measuring is your ability to take the test after reading book 2, you can still remember what you read back in book 1, and that influences your performance after reading book 2. That's why there was an increase in scores after the second treatment. Now let's talk about what we can do in order for us these different sources of error and experimentation. The first thing that you can do is controlling time. If there's a problem with the time span of the study, then let's try to control it. For example, if the different treatment conditions are scheduled over a period of weeks, the chances greatly increase that an outside event, maturation, or change in the measurement instrument will have an influence on the results. So what we can do is that we can try to shorten the span of the experiment. For example, if instead of doing that for 3 weeks, let's try to do it in 3 days. However, if you do it that way, there's another threat, and what is that? Practice effect or fatigue. That's why you need to find a balance between stretching your experiment or compressing your schedule. Because the longer the time span of your experiment, the greater the possibility that there are outside factors. But the shorter your time span, then there's a higher possibility for practice effects. So, what is my advice? I hope that you'll be able to conduct a pilot testing first so that ahead of time you will know how can practice effect and how can external events affect the results of your experiment. Also, if a within subject design will cause a lot of problem, then you can simply switch to a between subjects design. Usually a between subjects design, the one with separate groups, is available as an alternative and completely eliminates any threat of confounding from order effects. However, when you switch from within groups to between groups, then you're going to have to deal with new problems. And what are those? You will have to deal with the problems that we talked about in the previous lecture, such as matching, randomization, and other things. Also, if there are problems when it comes to order effects, you can apply what we call counterbalancing. I think I've already mentioned to you what counterbalancing is. So, counterbalancing is defined as changing the order in which treatment conditions are administered from one participant to another so that treatment conditions are matched with respect to time. Example earlier in this lecture, participants were asked to say either neutral or curse words. But in that experiment, they counterbalanced the treatment by changing the order. Some participants were told to say neutral words first, while some other participants were told to say curse words first, so that the order of the conditions will not affect the results of the study. What are the limitations of counterbalancing? With only two treatment conditions, complete counterbalancing is easy. It's easy for you to order the manipulation in a way that you will reduce order effects. And there are only two possible sequences. However, as the number of treatments increases, complete counterbalancing will become more complex. Say, for example, what if you have 8 treatments? Rock music, pop music, classical music, then you're going to make one person hear all those types of music. If you're going to do that to a lot of participants, then you have to get all possible combinations in order for you to completely counterbalance the order of your manipulation. And that takes a lot of time. Sometimes you might consider limiting your manipulations so that it will be easier to do counterbalancing. Now, let's talk about the advantages of a within subjects design. One advantage is that it requires relatively few participants in comparison to between subjects design. And why is that? In between subjects design, if you have three conditions with 30 participants each, you need 90 participants. But in a within subject design and you have three conditions, you can reuse the same participants. That's why instead of needing 90, you can only make use of 30 participants. And that saves a lot of time and effort. It essentially eliminates all the problems based on individual differences that are the primary concern of between subjects design. Remember, last time we talked about the influence of individual differences that is being eliminated when we do a within subject design. However, when you make use of within subjects design, you will encounter new problems such as practice and fatigue and other things. Other than that, you might encounter what we call mortality, or because you're using the same participants again and again, and what if you need their participation for 8 weeks? Some participants who start the research study may be gone before the study is completed. They may drop out, they may quit. Hence, your group will not be the same as when you started the experiment. That's why this will influence how you make conclusions, because most of the time the participants who are going to stay are those who have very high commitment. That is also a factor in making conclusions, because right now, personality is having an influence on your results. Now, how do you know if you're going to use a within subject design or a between subjects design? Look at these three scenarios. So, if you anticipate large individual differences, perhaps it's better to use within subjects design. So you will know it. Sometimes before you decide on conducting experiments, you try to read the literature, try to determine if individual differences will be a big factor in that study. Other than that, whenever you expect one or more treatment conditions to have a large and long-lasting effects that may influence the participants in the future conditions, meaning there can be practice effect or fatigue effects, order effects, then it's better to use a between subjects design. For example, if your experiment is about test taking or it's about teaching, perhaps a within subjects design is not the best. It's not the best approach, because if you use teaching as manipulation, then that's not going to be easily forgotten. It will be retained even after some time. And lastly, whenever it's difficult to find and recruit participants, a within subject design is a better choice. For example, you want to conduct experiments with people with learning disability, then it might be difficult to find 100 individuals with learning disability. That's why it's better to make use of a within subject design. However, the challenge here is that you need to get their commitment to participate in your study. So here are the applications, just like last time. A within subject design can be used in evaluating two conditions, but this time you have same participants. So that's the simplest type of a within subjects design. Also, you can make use of multiple treatment designs, or you can have three or more groups. And multiple treatment designs also produce a more convincing demonstration of cause and effect relationships compared to a two-group design. The problem is that it may be hard to get their commitment for a long period of time. That's why you need to weigh a lot of issues before choosing if you're going to make use of a between subjects or a within subjects design. Basically, that's what you need to learn about within subjects design, and I do hope that you learned a lot from this discussion, and you need to be more cautious before deciding on your experimental design. That's it, and I hope you learned a lot. Thank you.